Dr. Jazz.
I've been a fan for such a long time, and I've played with so many musicians you also played with, and I want to start with your latest trio with John and Nasheet.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you know, I played with John years ago, and he's one of the best virtuosos on bass. And when I listen to you guys, the Exaltation trio, it's like you have another horn again, which, although it's in the form of double bass, and Nasheet, you know, he's the master. And I wanted to ask you first, I saw the footage on YouTube from the Vision Festival you guys did in trio, and I listened to the record, of course, and it's amazing, you know. And I wanted to ask you, how did you hook up with those guys? I know you played with Andrew Hill together, and I mean, how does this story of the trio begin? If we start here, actually, in the future, in the present.
It does begin with Andrew Hill. And the three of us were in and at different, somewhat at different times, but a lot of overlap in Andrew Hill's point of departure sextet. So we toured together and over sort of a 5-year period played at different times. So when I thought of I hadn't done a trio in a good while.
Yeah.
And I'd done my big band record, A Trumpet in the Morning, and other things. I said, what if I try just a trio, you know, just the bare trio? I immediately thought of John and Nasheet.
Mm. Yeah.
And our central piece of music that we did at every gig we've done is the tune Dusk.
Dusk, yeah.
By
sure.
Andrew Hill. And we, you know, did it on the record sort of differently, you know, to some extent. And, but it's, yeah, so that was the connection. And my idea as well was, you know, the Trio Exaltation can also be the name of my trio. John and Nasheet are very busy guys.
Yeah, they are.
And, you know, so yeah, so I recently performed my first performance since COVID with
really? Oh, wow.
with Michael Formanek and Tomo Fujiwara.
Oh, wow.
Which was lovely.
Yeah, the thumb screw kind of
yes.
Without Mary.
Of course, yeah, and you know, Michael and I have been playing together for, gosh, forever. So,
yeah, a really long time, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but we mentioned Andrew Hill, and I wanted to ask you, like, how was it like? For me, he's like one of the most underrated piano players and composers, definitely. I mean, musicians know him, of course, but like speaking of wider public, how was it for you to play with him? And I mean, we will go back a little in your career. I think you played with so many unique and individual musicians with individual personalities. That's, I think, probably why you also developed in this way, that you're composition-wise and playing-wise. So
I've said I have been fortunate to have played with many generations of stubborn individuals.
Yeah.
I like that word.
Yeah.
Because I realized that my whole career in New York City, since I got there in 1978, with the fewest of exceptions, has been playing people's original music.
Yeah, exactly.
Because these were all people who created their own context. So you take Andrew Hill.
Yeah, how was it like to play with him? What was he like as a leader? And
well, I was, of course, very excited when he gave me the phone call. And of course, you know, grew up listening to his music, those classic records like we all did. But he was writing new music, and he was working very closely with Ron Horton, the brilliant and deeply expressive trumpet player, who has also helped put together a lot of that sextet music. He
Oh, really?
And Ron did a very interesting thing. It's the same thing that oh God, I forget his name. You know, the Monk big band that the composer who arranged Monk's music for big band, the very first. Oh, it just slipped in my mind.
Oh shit. Nah.
And what made it distinctive? Well, gosh, sorry, but what Ron did was transcribe some of Andrew's solos and make the three-horn soli sections.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
From Andrew's improvisation, which is exactly what they did on the Monk record.
Yeah.
The famous Monk at Town Hall big band.
That's amazing. Yeah,
people are going to think I'm getting senile.
No.
I'm a jazz scholar, and he's so, I mean, it just somehow just went out of my mind.
No, it's like let's wait. We have to figure it out. Okay, Charlie Rose, of course. Hal Overton.
Hal Overton.
Yeah. Okay.
This is what Hal Overton had done, and it made it very distinctive.
Yeah.
And so so that was a big part of the sextet, and working with Andrew was it was exciting, and it also had its challenges. He's very enigmatic. He's very mysterious. You have to put a lot of room around things, and you have to feel it out. And I'm pretty good at that. He wasn't the first time I had worked with a person like that.
Yeah.
But it was, and he once let me know, he said, I appreciate that you don't try to set things. Your solos change from night to night. He said, I appreciate that. And that was a nice vote of confidence. He's like, I want you to be creative in the moment. Don't set things. And because his playing was very, he could suddenly let the ground open up underneath you, One very amazing thing was to hear his piano playing night after night.
Yeah.
You really, when you are on the bandstand with him, you hear, I don't know a pianist who gets the sound out of the piano like him. Just certain chords had a resonance, very bell-like. Piano's a hard instrument to have individuality of sound on, and it was really phenomenal.
Yeah, so unique
to hear that playing night after night.
Yeah, and did you guys ever talk about music, like how to approach it, or was that like?
Well, he would. He didn't like to rehearse a long time.
Okay.
I didn't ask him too much. I know he didn't like. I didn't bother him about, well, tell me about Tony Williams.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't do any of that.
Okay.
I tried to just do the gig, and now and again he would gossip about this or that, but it wasn't. He was fun. He would joke around.
Yeah.
He had a lot of. He was a very polite man. A little bit a way to, you saw that he put a little bit of politeness between him and the world. So I got the thing, like, just try to be there and jump in, and it was I did the sextet for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. We made one record, then we did a big band record, and then he formed a quintet that I wasn't in.
Oh, okay.
Except a few years down the road, he called me to sub. Greg Tardy was the sax player in that.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And he called me to sub in it. I played alto, but so I got to do 2 gigs. At this point, it was John Hebert and Eric McPherson.
Yeah, they played in trio.
Andrew would only live another year or so, but those last 2 gigs were a real ear opener for me. I feel so fortunate that I got one more chance.
Yeah,
because I had also been thinking a lot about, as I wrote in a recent interview in Point of Departure, the trio sounded so spacious. I almost did like a solo with very little in it, and it felt like I didn't need to make anything happen.
Mm.
And it was a wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's beautiful. But speaking of your trio, like when I listen to what you wrote, the melodies are beautiful, and you do like that dance number 5, the 10/4,
Yeah,
5
yeah.
5/4 groove, and almost or yeah, I love that. You start it and then you leave John alone, and reading the river kind of, which ends, it's kind of like ornetish, this like.
Yeah.
But, and I wanted to, yeah, well, I love it. It's beautiful. And but I wanted to ask you, how do you compose? Let's say, in general, for projects, like, do you know, like, when you did the Trio Exaltation, that you have John and Nasheet?
Well,
like, what was your process
yes,
here,
of course.
compositional?
Well, we had done not a lot of gigs, but I'd say 5 or 6 gigs. And I had been experimenting on the gigs with a continuous set, actually trying to use the idea that I had gotten working with Anthony Braxton, both doing Anthony's own music and the time I played alto while he played piano, and we played all standards and jazz repertoire. And his approach is that after you bring in a composition, you don't go back to it. You let the improvisation go where it's going. At some point, you bring in a new theme. The only time you repeat is for the very last piece. So I tried that, and it took some work. We worked it out. But I also was trying different material. Of course, with rhythm sections like John and Nasheet or Michael and Toma, I mean, any material you bring in is going to work. You can play, you can be as abstract as you want. You can be as tonal as you want. You can be any grooves, any non-grooves. So I was also trying to feel out, what did I want? And knowing that there's no one perfect formula. But I think on the record, I did write some new music, and it was a quick recording session. And I ended up with some pretty simple themes. Reading the River's an older piece of mine. I recorded it 30 years ago. So it was sort of fun to bring that out again.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And again, records are their own process, what works in a stretched out context of a concert where there's this drama and something takes off, but something sort of sits for a minute, and that's fine. The people are with you, and then blah, blah, blah. In a recording studio, that doesn't always work so well, nor is it always so easy. You're playing in headphones. We didn't have a whole lot of time. John was playing a borrowed bass, which was, we went through 3 basses.
Oh, really? Oh, shit.
But anyway, so I do think I thought about some new things, what will work for a trio context. And I think I found a certain balance. There are some grooves in there, some ostinatos, there's some open stuff as well. And we just did some open improvs.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Like you said, with this trio, anything goes, anything works.
Yeah.
But with coming up with stuff as a composer, how do you usually do it? Like, I mean, I know it differs from different approaches, but like usually a melody pops up, you write it down, and then you start, like kneading it and stuff. Or
yes, I keep a notebook of ideas, just like
you do. Okay, super.
They tell you if you're studying poetry or
Yeah.
If Allen Ginsberg was walking down the street and he says, "I've seen the best minds of my generation, sieged by madness," whatever it is, the beginning of Hal, he writes it down.
Yeah.
So in Allen's case, he then wrote another 4,000 lines all at once. But I keep a notebook. I'll tell you, and this is going to sound a little bit like a complaint about technology, is that it helps for me to have deadlines.
Yeah.
And when I was recording more, it really helped me to have a recording project. because for me, the CD, the LP, the CD were a symphonic form. And so I'd write a first piece, whatever it was, ugly, pretty, slow, fast, edgy, calm, whatever. And then I think, okay, what's the contrast? And then what is, for the third piece, what haven't I done? And then the fourth, and so for me, it was that process.
To have a story, right? The whole thing, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So that helps me, and I think even as the whole idea of well, listen, ever since the CD, you didn't have control easily over the order people listened.
Yeah.
On an LP, you could drop the needle, and you did, but we spent a lot of time in the LP area really figuring out what should open the first side, what should open the second side, which tune, the weakest tune you tended to put in the middle of the B side, or not even the weakest, maybe the one slightly different, you know.
Sure.
And like I said, for me, just like, because I started as a writer, and I do a fair amount of writing as well, not so much creative writing anymore, but I've been doing scholarship. For me, that's how I do it. But to answer your question, and I've taught composition a lot, I am the type of person, I just got to find something that hooks me. And it just might be, I mean, Ornette Coleman, it seems that what Pat Metheny called him a songbird, that melody, you know, things just, Bobby Bradford said they used to go rehearse, and like the floor would be littered with themes.
Wow.
Reach down and hand them a piece of paper.
But
you know, he also, but I wonder if he, like, you know, let's say like one day he heard dee da 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 da. Maybe that's what he heard. Well, it's a great motive. And then he came up, I don't want to repeat that. What would set that up? Da 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 da. Da 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 da. See, that's a great tune to use as a teacher, because it's three very different pieces of music.
Three motives
together to make a beautiful poem. Any of the three could be their own springboard, but put together, they make a much more complex emotional space to improvise off of. They also just sound, even if you don't improvise, I mean, who wouldn't want to have written that composition? So for me, it's like finding that hook. And I think because I did study, my first creative space was poetry many, many years ago.
Really?
Making no claims.
I also studied poetry.
I had some really good teachers. This is before I went to college, but
really?
That's where I learned about revision. And I think just because growing up, you know, speaking. So my problem is when I get into it, I then start the revision process, and then I'm in good shape.
Do you, like with the bands, let's say for the trio or either bands you had, like when you bring the music to the people, do you then revision it or change it? Like what functions, what doesn't, or not necessarily?
That's the thing. With the rarest of exceptions, all my composing conceives of improvisation. This is my tradition. What George Lewis calls the aphrological, the logic within the great African American tradition is, and obviously the breaking down of walls between pre-decided music and spontaneous music. So in the trio, I'm very conscious to have things that get a little bit out of the way. But when I have a second horn, or the ability to use more harmony, like in my Wrights quartet, then I did a sextet gig a while back, and I actually spent a whole summer writing a lot of moving lines and stuff. So for that, I really do think about the beauty of the composition standing on its own.
That's beautiful. It's like you've been blessed also. You mentioned like 70s already, and I want to then go back to some of the players you played with, but
Sure.
like even in the recent times, I listened to the Clean Feed one, the Muhal,
The Muhal thing, yes,
Muhal thing, the sound pad,
Isn't
and
that
you,
amazing piece? Yeah.
man, you know, there's like midsection Mike Formanek. Michael takes like a bass solo, and you go somewhere, and you know, we started with Andrew Hill, and there is Muhal here, another one of the
Well,
greats.
they were good friends. They were both
Yeah.
from Chicago.
Makes
and,
sense, yeah.
They very much. I don't think they were direct. I don't want to say they were influences, but they were kindred spirits.
Yeah.
They shared a great, and they had a lot of respect for each other. And it's interesting that I played so much with both of them. Well, I played a lot with Muhal.
Yeah.
What I did, you know, when Bobby Zankel, who had premiered the piece with Muhal, and when Bobby and I sat down to think of it, how will this work on a recording?
Yeah.
The first performance of it, it's very intense composition. It's like
40 minutes or yeah.
Well, the actual writing is only about 12 minutes, maybe 15,
and then
because of the one slow section. But his composing is like, it's like it's ready for an atomic explosion.
Yeah.
There's so much going on. It's very condensed. So the idea, and then Muhal would open up for fairly long improvisational things.
Yeah.
And in live concerts, you know, and he was actually, yeah. So our thing was like how we wanted to find a balance, because you don't want on a record to go for 15 minutes between the written music and the next written music. The listener, there's no continuity. So,
Yeah.
and I also really wanted to use everybody in some fashion. They were all creative improvisers.
Yeah, amazing band. Yeah.
Amazing band.
Yeah.
And so we spent, this is something I'm good at, something I enjoy. I make a chart. I use colored pencils. I move things about. It's sort of like making a film script. And and talk about doing records in a short amount of time. I mean, it's ridiculous what we did to pull that off. But we pulled it off. It sounds great. The players did a wonderful job. And we got in a lot of variety, which is very much Muhal's interest in methodology. That everything from a solo to a duo to a trio to different groupings of instruments to, of course, a horn soloing over a swinging rhythm section. This is all a drum solo at the end. I mean, he used the whole spectrum, and I think we very much got it in. As I write, though the liner notes didn't make it into the thing, every time this piece is done, it should be done. The order of the 6 composed sections are what they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But as to a shaping through improvisation before them and somewhat within them and then between them, I think should be in constant flux.
Yeah.
That's the sound path.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, man. Really, it's a nice one because it just goes
piece of Muhal.
like this. Yeah.
And
it's not boring in a way. It could be boring if it was not arranged in a nice manner, but now it's like it is. It's just like, wow,
well,
it's
I'm glad
over.
you feel that way, Sam.
Yeah.
Because I also have no problem with CDs being shorter. I mean,
Yeah.
in the end, it's a little over 40 minutes.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's a hell of a long symphony to listen to. And let's remember that all our classic records, The Kind of Blues, The Love Supremes, The Conference of the Birds, Andrew Hill's Point of Departure, the list goes on and on and on, are sort of about 36 minutes.
Yeah, not too long, yeah.
And they felt like a complete world that we're still fascinated by.
Funny, right? It's like once the CDs came, everyone tended to start making albums which lasted like, I don't know, 71 minutes, which is cool sometimes. But
understand that there was also, and for some artists, they welcomed it.
Yeah.
For certain types of music. But there was also a pressure at the beginning, because I think, I remember one label I was recording for, I'm not sure exactly who, but saying, well, we're making CDs now. And you can put on 70 plus minutes. So people want that because we're asking them to pay at that time
Yeah.
twice to three times more money than they were playing for records.
Yeah.
So you need to come up. And many people, I just saw something by Jeremy Pelt, a quote from Ron Carter. Jeremy Pelt has a book out now. Ron
Really?
Carter saying he really was angry about this. Because first of all, he felt that extra 30 minutes was rarely that good.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was an older guy. But again, for certain things, it was great. A Morton Feldman piece, or somebody who really specialized in long form.
Yeah.
I think Tim Byrne is someone who used it to great advantage.
Yeah,
because
he
he was
did.
working
Yeah.
in very long form things. He comes to mind in improvised music.
Yeah.
And of course, if the CD is like this Julius Hemphill archival box set I curated.
I saw that.
Well,
That's incredible.
Well, we used
That's
great length because we're trying to include a lot of things.
Yeah.
One thing that was interesting in putting that together is, for you the older people who will be listening, remember the cassette. But in Julius's time, the majority of the medium that his live concerts were recorded was on cassettes. And the problem with cassettes is they're always running out of time.
Yeah.
And because often it wasn't somebody even watching them. So, they'd be playing, and Julius would play long. It's a live gig. He'd stretch out, trumpet player stretch out. He wasn't worried about time.
Yeah.
And suddenly the cassette stops. And you lose a minute or two because then it gets turned over and you get the rest of the music.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting. How did you avoid that? Well, with one thing was, even of course, reel to reel was even shorter. But that's where they would make people, if they knew they were doing a live recording, they'd say you have to keep your pieces short.
Yeah.
Or else they'd have to run two machines, which did, interestingly enough, happen for one of Julius's concerts, actually at Carnegie Recital Hall. And it wasn't listed on the tape. It took me a lot of work I finally figured out between these four different tapes how it all, it was like a chess problem.
Man. Yeah. But you mentioned Julius now. I mean, I'll just grab you by your word. I mean, I know you played with the Sextet like in the early 90s with him.
Yes, when he formed it in 1989. And
with James Carter and Sam Furness and all these amazing players. And
that was the original band with Andrew
Yeah.
White, James Carter, Sam Furness, myself, and Kenny Berger.
Yeah.
And we kept it going. When Julius got too sick to play full time, Tim Byrne came in, and then Andy Laster. So we were a seven-piece group. But we really were seven because Julius still played. He was in a wheelchair, but he would play introductions, and they'd break your heart. They were so beautiful, and he'd conduct us and everything. But we toured a lot with him. I mean, we did a lot of gigs with Julius, especially because we were working full-time with the dance company, Bill T. Jones, Arnie's company. And I did hundreds of gigs with Julius with that sextet. And then after Julius died, we kept the sextet going. I took on the role as musical director, which I sort of had been doing in the end then. I was playing the first alto book, sort of playing his parts, and had been working, very closely with him. But we really, as a group, felt it's worth keeping this music. He had written so much beautiful music.
Yeah, incredible.
So we were able to keep it alive for about another 10 years.
That's incredible.
Here or there.
Yeah. Like, when did you hook up? I mean, I did this talk with Tim Byrne, and
yes,
when we played with Tim, I also asked him many times about Julius because he's also such a big fan of Julius, and
sure.
And was he a connection to Julius for you or no? Like,
well, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, where Julius lived for 8 years or so, and was one of the founding members of the Black Artist Group in 1967 or so. I only meet Julius briefly in St. Louis.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious. Yeah.
He moves to New York in 1973. I go to college in 1973. I had met him, but I begin to meet him a little bit when I go back to St. Louis. And then I also, but I'm in Boston. Tim, I believe in around 1974, calls Julius up. Imagine Tim talked about this and says, "Do you give lessons?" And Julius joked. He said, "Well, I've had one person called me for lessons. It was Tim Byrne." So we give credit to Tim to reach out to Julius. He did not. He didn't look to teach. Turned out that Alan Chase told me he got a lesson from him. I never took a lesson from him. I mean, nothing normal. But and Tim, and so I then meet Tim, and when I finished college in 1978, I move into Tim's apartment in Brooklyn.
Really?
And Tim really helped me get started. And Julius at that time often was living in that apartment, as were some other people. But and I was in.
It was like a laughter
It was a loft,
Yeah,
a former manufacturing thing, and it had. We could play all night long because it was beautiful. In downtown Brooklyn, and it was just empty. At that time, downtown Brooklyn was pretty funky. So we would practice at 2 and 3 in the morning. And about a year later, I had been roommates in Boston with Jerome Harris. And
that's where you go. Okay.
We were very close friends. He and I got a place together also in Brooklyn. So I begin really to work with Julius around 1978. He starts to hire me to do things.
Already.
And I do a small group thing here, one thing at the Creative Music Studio. We're beginning to talk a whole lot. And he puts together a big band. What was a 12-piece group, but he becomes the Julius Hemphill Big Band in 1979 and 1980. And it's funny, now that I have the tapes, I actually recommended about half the musicians in it because half of them are from Boston. He said, "Well, Marty, who do you know?" And which was great. Ed Schuller, I read Stan Strickland, with whom I've been playing.
Sure, playing a lot.
Emmett McDonald on tuba, and Emmett is still touring as we speak with Sun Ra. Or someone else that I brought from the Boston. John Clark on French horn.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, and then from there I began to do a lot more with Julius.
Yeah.
But we had the connection of St. Louis, and in particular, to bring up a name, sadly, who has passed away this year, Malenke Elliott, a phenomenal theater person, my dearest, closest friend and mentor. I met him when I was 14, when I took a theater class from him, and I never stopped talking to him. And he and Julius, of course, were the closest of colleagues in the Black Artist Group, and for many years after, they would collaborate on theatrical work.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, in St. Louis, the time I first really spent time with Julius is I'm back from college. He's driving. His aunt in California gives him a car, so he drives back. He flies to California and he's driving back to New York where he lives. And Malenke says, "Hey man, Julius is going to stay here for 3 days. Come and hang out." So I go and I just hang out from morning to night talking with him.
Oh wow!
And I remember driving him to get the car. He had the car worked on in St. Louis, and as I write, the sad thing. And so he brings it back to New York City in 1974, which was a pretty, this is made famous by the film Fort Apache. New York was in not great shape.
Yeah.
And the night he brings it back to New York, it gets stolen.
Stolen. Oh, wow. Shit.
So he never gets to drive it. And I don't think Julius ever owned a car again.
Man.
But in any event, I spend those 3 days, and you know, began what felt was this sort of this, you know, long discussions with him, along with playing with him.
Yeah.
I found him just really easy to talk with and interested to talk with, and he liked, in his own way, he didn't like to listen to music, but he liked to talk about it,
Yeah.
about
That's
history,
beautiful.
about ideas. It was, you know, a palatable thing for him.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I know Malinka through Malinka's Dance.
Yes, yes.
I love that album. That one, it's with Tony, right? Malaby. And
With the great Tony Malaby.
I love that. You two are like, I mean,
Well, Tony's a
Tony's a master.
creative force of nature.
He is. I played so much with him, and it's
Yes.
amazing. I
Oh,
love
that's
it.
cool. He and I were talking yesterday.
I really.
We're always checking in on certain horn things, and
Oh wow, super.
he sent me a link, a YouTube of Harold Vick.
Yeah,
Not always well known, but
yeah.
one of the great
The greats. Yeah,
soul tenor players. With Tony and I talk a lot about saxophone sound, and Harold Vick had it.
yeah.
Tenor
Yeah.
players, go listen to Harold Vick.
Carol Vick, again, one of those who
With
are
Shirley
not so
Scott,
known.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, not all that well known.
Yeah,
He
should
wasn't a
be.
star,
Should be.
but you know, a
Yeah.
big part of the music.
Speaking of your own sound, like when I hear you play, I many times, maybe I'm wrong, hear the influence of Eric Dolphy. Was he an
Well, he
important
was a huge influence on me.
influence on you? Oh,
Except
okay.
I can't sound like him. No one can sound like him.
I know he was crazy,
Not on
right?
bass clarinet.
Yeah,
Forget it on
yeah,
alto.
yeah.
But I mean, I was introduced to playing flute, clarinet, and sax at a very young age, and also with the idea. And I had an amazing teacher in St. Louis named Les Scott, who was in the St. Louis Symphony.
Symphony. Yeah.
But he was also a phenomenal, and is to this day, classical. He could play flute, clarinet, or sax
Mm.
in a symphonic level. Flute third, but he had a long career as a top level multi-instrumentalist, including in symphonies.
Yeah.
St. Louis Symphony, the New York Philharmonic, many years of theater work and recording. So he was a great teacher early on. And then, of course, one of the first records I hear is a Dolphy record. And
Which one?
What the heck? It was called the, you know, things get reissued. My sister brought home from the library. It's called the Eric Dolphy Solo.
Oh, okay.
Eric Dolphy's story. And one side
okay.
were the duets with Richard Davis, where they play alone together.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I fell in love with the bass clarinet.
Yeah.
As I joke, I was 14. I didn't know much. And I didn't know that Alone Together was a standard.
Yeah.
And granted, they really stretch it out, right? It's a perfect title for a duo, Alone
Yeah.
Together.
Sure.
And then a few years later, I start to learn tunes, and I'm like, but that record really blew my mind. It also had Music Matador, a shout out, in memory of Sonny Simmons, who just passed away.
Oh yeah, man, such a player.
And of course, soon I'm going to start listening to all of it. But Dolphy's a big role model, and I'm really drawn to the bass clarinet.
Yeah.
But I'm playing flute by that point too. I have taken some flute lessons, and you know, I was a classical clarinetist, but I get really into the new jazz and the politics of it and everything, and I just have to put classical clarinet. When I make the break, I really make the break. It would be years till I sort of bring clarinet and a certain classical approach back in. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
when
that's
I go
beautiful.
to New England Conservatory,
Yeah.
well, anyway, I eventually become a jazz major there, and I focus a lot on the saxophone, but I kept taking flute lessons, and
Yeah.
so
Like
Dublin
everything.
has always been, and of course I was, you know, the art ensemble. You know, the whole idea was that this music was about tone color. In fact, I get a little bored just hearing a saxophone all night long.
Yeah.
I still do.
Yeah,
I
sure.
like, people criticized me or said, well, Marty, you know, what's your instrument? I mean, that's always been the doubler's thing. And it's valid. I want to say this though, through the 80s into the 90s, my playing these instruments really, it not only helped me work and make a living, it was greatly appreciated by all the composers I worked with.
Yeah.
I think in jazz and even in the new jazz, things switch more towards back a little to the virtuosity on one instrument, and which has a lot of validity too. But hey, it's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Sure.
For me, I like the range of moods.
Yeah.
So I got to where I didn't like to bring more than three instruments was enough for improvisational gigs.
Sure.
I think on the trio record, I play clarinet, bass clarinet, and alto.
Yeah.
But so Dolphy, and of course, look, I study with Jackie Byard.
Yeah, I know. I saw that.
I study with Gunther Schuller. I basically I study with George Russell, who Dolphy.
Yeah.
New England Conservatory was basically Eric Dolphy University. I mean, Gunther Schuller had nothing but the highest praise for Eric Dolphy.
Yeah.
And when I'm there on a third stream concert, I play Ornette's part. Someone else plays Dolphy part, but we do Gunther's variations on a theme by Thelonious Monk, which on the original record has Ornette and Eric Dolphy. And it goes very well, and Gunther asks us to come up to the president's office, and he has two pictures, that famous shot of Dolphy with the bass clarinet over his shoulder. Yeah. Bruce, forgetting Bruce's last name, he gives each of us, I don't think they were framed, but he gives each of us, we just felt like $1 million. He said, "Great job. Here's a picture of Eric Dolphy." And I still have the picture from Gunther.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. Oh, yeah.
That's
a monster.
The teacher, the famous saxophone teacher there was Joseph Allard. And Dolphy had taken some lessons. And Joe really liked Dolphy. His story, is that Coltrane, Joe was one of the few guys who would hang with it, not hang, but he'd go listen to jazz, and he taught a lot of jazz musicians of many generations. And he claims that Coltrane called him and said, "Joe, you got to help me. I love Eric, but when he starts to squeak too much on the bass clarinet, it bothers, can you help him?" And Joe claims he helped him get a different mouthpiece. And
oh, wow.
Having said that, it's very hard to play a clarinet at the velocity and exuberance of an Eric Dolphy and not get a squeak here or there.
Yeah, no, man, it's so incredible.
He was really crazy about Eric, and so I was just always a lot of Eric.
Yeah. Did you ever see those guys in St. Louis live, like Coltrane or
no?
Like
first of all, I was born when I come on the scene, when I become aware of jazz.
Those guys were gone, kind of.
Well, it's around 1970.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Where I begin to go down. St. Louis was very segregated. As we know in recent time, Missouri is a pretty racist, white supremacist, troubled place in many ways. Though the community I grew up in, University City, was also very progressive, and it was one of the first integrated communities. But I begin to go down to some of the jazz clubs. But and I meet the Black Artist Group guys. But at that point in America, the whole structure of clubs that had supported the hard bop generation. In other words, there was a whole circuit that a Horace Silver, an Art Blakey, a Coltrane, a Miles, the list goes on, would go from, black community, Detroit to Chicago to Philly to Pittsburgh, blah, blah, blah. St. Louis and, some of the riots or the rebellions of the 60s, the inner cities had not gotten rebuilt. In any event, there was no club in St. Louis that brought national acts in. So I heard Mingus once because he came to Wash U. I heard Booker White once. But basically, I heard the St. Louis musicians.
Okay.
When I get to Boston in 1973, there were two famous clubs there, the Jazz Workshop and Paul's Hall. And everybody still played clubs. I hear everybody. It was my education. I
Yeah.
hear Mingus, I hear Rollins, I hear Miles, I hear Cannonball, I hear McCoy, I hear Braxton, I hear
Oh, yeah.
Cecil, I
Wow.
hear Larry Coryell, I see the Meters, I see Sun Ra, I see Betty Carter more than a few times, blow my mind with John Hicks and Dave Holland. The list goes on. Freddie Hubbard, Dexter Gordon. I mean,
Man, yeah, okay.
every week. I heard that the great Mingus Quintet with George Adams, Don Pullen, and Jack Walrath.
Yeah,
I mean, I would just go night after night. So I feel so fortunate that I did get to hear the giants of that era.
yeah,
Because by the end of the 70s, most of those artists will not play in clubs anymore.
yeah,
The bigger names, financially, it made no sense. A Miles or Sonny Rollins could make way more money doing a concert.
sure.
And they didn't want to have to play 2 sets or 3 sets 6 nights a week.
Yeah,
But boy, I went and saw Cecil with Jimmy Lyons, Andrew Cyril, and Cerrone
wow.
6 nights in a row. Finally, Jimmy Lyons walks over to me and goes, "Who are you? We're here every night. What's going on?" And we sit down and talk.
Beautiful. That's so beautiful. Man, yeah, that's the best to see in a club, like, because it's so intimate. It's
Well,
just,
there
you
were
feel the
bad
spirit and the music.
musicians. Yes, it didn't always come with the best comfort and financial concerns for the musicians, understood.
Yeah,
But yeah, well, it still is. You go to the Vanguard, you're right up there.
Yeah.
These are small spaces, and same in Europe.
yeah,
I mean, but yeah, and I would often at the workshop, you could stand against the wall behind the piano, and if you were just sort of, especially if it was full, if you were sort of just chill, and I stood there watching McCoy's left hand, watching Don Pullen's left hand,
man.
watching Cecil. You couldn't necessarily stay for. You had to be. I had figured out that I could sort of hide for 5 minutes, and then the club would look at you. But yeah, I mean, I'd be right there.
Yeah, that's
It's
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah,
And it's why
Beautiful.
a guy like Joe Allard would say, "You don't know how Charlie Parker sounds," because the records never quite capture it. I mean,
Sure.
he would say the sound was just, went right through you.
yeah, probably, yeah. But you mentioned all these players, and you moved to New York in 1979, right?
Yes.
And then I listened
Yeah.
to the other day to Braxton's Creative Köln Orchestra, where you're on it, which is 78.
That was my though. So wait, I moved in 78. You're right.
78.
78.
Ah, okay. But
That is my first time going to Europe. That was my
yeah,
first
this was my question. Like, I mean, 2 questions hidden in
after
one.
Chico Hamilton. Mhm.
Like,
Go
how
ahead.
was your first time? Yeah, going to Europe. How was that like for you? And I mean,
Well, the whole gig happened he needed somebody at the last minute, and I actually get hired 3 days before the tour, and I didn't have a passport. But
Oh, wow,
fortunately,
man.
back then, through the use of some phone calls and between my mother and I'm born in St. Paul, I get the passport. And yeah, I'm going to Europe with like this 26. There's 26 people on a bus.
how could that be? Yeah, like Marion Crispell, Ray Anderson, the list goes
It
on.
was
Kenny Wheeler,
amazing. Well, as I said, it had at that time the trombone section of Doom, Joe Bowie, Ray Anderson, and George Lewis.
Yeah,
And neither of those 3 were going to let the other 2, take more house. I mean, I'm not saying they weren't being musical. They were, but they were not. Nobody was going to be shy about their striking creativeness on the trombone. I was like, "Oh, here comes a trombone solo."
Yeah.
But the whole band was amazing, and Braxton was amazing. So that was just a phenomenal experience for me, and I fell in love with Braxton. He was so intense and enthusiastic and very nice.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience.
So basically, right almost after you moved to New York, you start working with all these musicians.
Well, things took
So
off.
was the
Yeah, I was
transition
so-
heavy or not? Like to New York, or was it like
Well,
this?
the first gig I get is with Chico Hamilton because his guitarist was Marvin Horn, who I played with in St. Louis.
Mm.
And Marvin called me up and said, Chico's auditioning sax players.
Oh, wow.
So I go down, and it didn't last long. And it was not an easy gig for me. But I remember this. I go down I need my horn fixed. And, you know, I'm nobody. I'm just a young kid. And a lot of young people with horns in New York City.
Yeah.
And I go in, and the guy goes, okay, leave it. Come back in 2 weeks. And I go, but I'm playing with Chico Hamilton in 3 days. He goes, playing with Chico? Okay, well, come back in 3 hours.
Oh, man. Wow.
And I'm like, yeah.
I'm the man.
I'm playing with Chico. I'm the man.
Man, that's beautiful.
I didn't feel like the man always when I played with Chico. So I go from Chico to Braxton, and then when I come back, George Russell forms his New York big band. He had been my teacher, and I play at the Vanguard a lot.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I was fortunate, and I was able to get started, and
getting some gigs and
money,
yeah.
And I did everything I could to make a living. I did theater,
sure.
You know, off Broadway. I accompanied dance classes. I played weddings. I did whatever I could. My thing was, I remember reading something, I think it was Dolphy even saying, I'm going to make my living with my horn. And I said, I'm going to make my living with my horn. So, but I did do anything I was not a snob.
Yeah.
Eventually, over time, things begin to, I'm able to make a living primarily from performing creative music. I begin to get some grants, which
yeah.
Not living on a whole lot of money. You're able,
yeah.
doubled up in houses, everything people do. But New York was much more affordable.
Yeah, cheaper. Everyone says that. Yeah, it's
much
like
cheaper.
Bizarre. Yeah.
You could make it work. And you could go to the clubs. I would go, you could buy one beer and stand at the bar. And you drink that beer for a long time.
And watch Sonny Rollins or whoever. Right? Yeah,
until they gave you a really evil look.
Yeah. Man, like but you mentioned Braxton, and I saw one footage with John Lindberg and John Batch. Like, did you through Braxton meet John Lindberg also because you played with him?
Well, Braxton, I don't, it's all sort of a family
connected.
The St. Louis guys were I was very fortunate. And look, they liked me. I was able to play their music, whatever. So, Bobo Shaw helped me out. Joe Bowie. Through the Braxton gig, I meet Leo, and we hit it off. And Leo, at the end, says, hey, I'm giving your number to Muhal. And I hear from Muhal. And then suddenly I hear from Leroy Jenkins. And
that's how it
went.
Okay.
I'm hearing from the ACM guys. So, it's just like Julius asked me, hey, I'm putting together a big band. Julius didn't go out and hear 1 million people. And he said, I need people who, first of all, he wanted to be sure they were people who could read his music.
Yeah.
I need readers, not just improvisers. One thing sort of does lead to another. And
sure.
And John, I have a feeling, probably met Braxton through Bobo. Bobo and Joe were sometimes playing, and John, of course, puts in a long. I talk to John a lot. We're dear friends. John puts in a long time with Anthony.
Yeah.
And had that the group with, of course, at different times, but John and Thurman Barker and Ray was one of Braxton's, I think, quite dynamic quartets, and sort of at a period where Braxton was still playing some time. He liked sort of the open swing thing that he did in the 70s. He's moving more towards what will become one of the next great groups of his with Marilyn, Dresser, and Hemingway, which is often based around these longer
quartets,
scored pieces.
Yeah. Like, but also one further. We're talking about the early '80s now. When does Marty say, okay, I want to become a band leader and issue an album? I know The Welcome with Farron and
it was The Welcome
Anthony Cox.
Jerome,
Yeah.
So that guy, I had I wasn't thinking about doing my own music. I was pretty scared about it.
Oh, really?
I
Oh,
actually
wow.
did a group with Jerome Harris because we had played together in Boston with Ed and Ferrone, but you know that didn't catch sparks business wise, and I think Lindbergh recommended me to Pedro de Freitas, who was the Portuguese owner of Sound Aspects Records. He was
Okay.
living with a German woman in Stuttgart. And that led to me doing this first trio record called The Welcome with
Yeah.
Anthony Cox and Ferrone. And that record did really good for me. And then it was interesting. And then I was supposed to do another one, and I get Bobby Previte, who I was playing with, and Anthony Cox and Stan Strickland
Strickland, yeah.
from Boston. The beginning of me and Stan really becoming a team. And Pedro, I think something, he might have had some issues. Something happened where I think he had to disappear. And I think it had something to do with the politics in Brazil. I don't know, but the date gets canceled. Except I decide I'm going to do it anyway. I scrape my pennies and I pay for it. And I remember sending out the tape to like 12 different places,
Yeah.
big and small, and I get one positive reply from Matthias Winkelmann of Enger Records.
Ah, well, okay.
For whom I'll record for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
And, very thankful to Matthias. And that record, Pliant Plaint, it found a certain responsive chord.
Yeah. But did you like becoming a band leader and let's say going to Europe? How was it like for you being a band leader? Is there like a certain pressure you feel, or no, or like especially when you were younger, like because it's a different animal than being a sideman, right? How was this like for you?
I was not thinking. Well, let me say two things. I think particularly having come from the Midwest, having been part of, in particular, this new music connected with the Black Artist Group and the ACM, and I really felt myself as being sort of very much supportive in the ways I was being asked to be of this movement and other things, and working with people like George Russell. I didn't have a thing saying I got to do my own music.
Yeah.
But I did notice in the mid 80s that I began to have my own ideas a lot more. And I did challenge myself. I said, you're sitting here thinking, well, this could be done this way, or maybe this makes more sense. And I said, maybe it is time for you to start to think about it more. And I began to write music. And the thing with Stan, I had a real connection with Stan, not just in Boston, but we actually played 2 or 3 summers at a resort on the island of Nantucket.
I love Nantucket, man.
So we had a lot of history. And so I had that connection. And then I'm going to get back in touch with the clarinet, and I'm going to form the Dark Woods Ensemble.
Yeah.
And because I realized that the clarinet, I missed it as a voice, not as a style. I got past worrying about it as classical, because I never related to swing era clarinet. I mean, now I
know. Yeah, I know what you mean.
I was not like, people at clarinet, so you're into Benny and Artie Shaw and all. I'm like, no.
It's a different creativity that can be done.
But and then the Dark Woods thing takes off for me, and between the 2 saxophone, bass, and drums group, and then this clarinet, cello, bass trio, these are my main
vehicles
groups, and I do develop a body of music.
Yeah.
It never becomes, and I play duo with people, but I never wanted to do it instead of playing with other people, and I still don't.
Sure.
I mean, I'm much older now. Being a side person is a younger person's game, but I love when my phone rings and someone says, "Hey, Steve Swell just called. spoiler alert, for a recording session, quintet. I'm going to leave it alone, but really interesting grouping of musicians, a couple I've never played with.
Beautiful.
I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
Also being a leader is very challenging business-wise.
Yeah, sure.
Everything's on you. If there's a problem, it's on you. If the promoter's unhappy, it's on you. If you have to lose money, you have to lose money.
Yeah. It's a funny thing.
Looking back, I'm thankful for the successes I've had.
Yeah. Now, music. I also, you mentioned now two different groups, but when I have you on so many records and I listen to your music a lot, and like one thing I notice is your selection of musicians is amazing. Let's say bass players, Mike Formanek, Mark Elias, Jerome Harris, like drummers, Bill Stewart, Peter Erskine, Billy Drummond, Bobby Previte, Andrew Cyril. So it's just like incredible. How do you
talent in New York City?
Yeah, how do you select these bands? Okay. Like, how do you decide which group you're gonna like bring together now, or is it coincidence, or
maybe a little of the? I mean, people have different. People are unique. Some of it's been fortunate. It hasn't always been clear to me. Well, let me explain. The collectives have been in a way easier. When I forget which collective I did first. I think it was with Mark Dresser, and of course I've been working with Andrew Cyril with Muhal and a lot with John Carter, and Mark and him had been playing, and Mark said, it was Mark's idea, and we got this idea. Originally we wanted it to be a quartet with Bobby Bradford.
Oh, wow.
And we'd call it BCDE. But it was only CDE. And that was very exciting. And we ended up doing 2 tours and 1 record. And it ran its course business-wise. And then I had worked with Peter Erskine with a sort of outlier gig with mine with Don Gronick.
I saw that you played with Don, yeah.
Right. I made 1 record on Blue Note. And that's actually Bill Stewart's on. But then I do a tour in England with the Brecker Brothers, Robin Eubanks, Peter Washington, Don Elias, and Peter on drums. And we become friends. And Michael Formanek says, well, Michael had been doing a lot of gigs with Peter. And he said, let's get together. We get together and we do a couple tours in a record. And 2 very different trios.
Yeah, completely.
And in my Traveler's Tale group, I like drummers who think compositionally. I like drummers who help shape the music. And I also need drummers who can be sort of pan-stylistic. And so sometimes that's been, balancing that out. And so, but when I think back, Allison Miller's done a lot of playing with me, wonderful drummer.
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah.
Ben Porowski just did some playing. I mean, everybody brings something different. And to me, it is a challenge. I mean, and then there's also balancing the business, because people... You call somebody, you also have to be able to deliver, and So anyway, but the groups I've put together.
Yeah.
And Billy was wonderful. Everybody's different.
It's I love that basically.
I'm gonna say there's no one formula. I think somewhat in the older days things might have happened a little more organically because people got to play together a lot more. There's more work. And yet sometimes some of the best bands happen by accidents.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's funny when I listen to the. I did this talk also with Bobby Previte, and Bobby's on your record, the Tales from 1990, and then like 1 year later, you're on the Weather Clear, and it's basically, Jerome also plays at the same time
Yes.
with you guys, and the same almost people, but two completely different records and concepts, and that's amazing. I find it so fascinating, you know.
Well, I'm glad you see that, and there's nothing magic about that. That's just to
Mm.
me just good
Yeah,
musicianship.
yeah,
And I think again, as a teacher, um, that's an important thing for It's like there, don't think that you have a hard and fast identity. These musics are all collective, and there's a real art to being a good side person,
yeah,
being a good interpreter. Um,
yeah,
there's definitely an art to it, and I'm not saying I've always made all the right decisions as a side person, but I think I got pretty good in the most part in being able to psych out the vibe they were looking for.
yeah, yeah. You always serve the music anyway, right? And
Sometimes it got a little schizophrenic.
in
There
what
was one
sense?
day that I went, I'm going to leave the names out, but they're two big names. And I went from a morning rehearsal where I didn't quite pull off something, and then on one instrument, I needed to be a little more, they were on my flute playing to be a little more really solid and almost intonation and everything. And then I go to the next rehearsal, and the first piece is on flute, and that person says, "You sound like you're trying to be really classical and worrying about the intonation, and that's not what I want, man. I mean, just let it go, man. I mean, give me some blues, And I'm like, so what I'd been tightening up on at 11 a.m. was not what was needed at 2 p.m.
Yeah,
You don't always hit,
the,
it's a good story though,
yeah,
and of course, look, I didn't lose either gig, and I said, you're right, and I loosened it totally up in that afternoon. But
that's
before
cool.
the next rehearsal for the morning group, I put in an extra couple hours to get my flute playing totally centered.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. Well, Marty, just one last thing, not to take too much of your time. We started basically, I said in the beginning, you've played you've become like an individual voice as a composer and as an instrumentalist. And you've played with all these individual voices, like with
Mm-hmm.
who are also like so original. How do you feel this? Did you develop this through playing with all these people and studying with all these strong individuals? Like,
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. Listen, I also had a lot of enthusiasm I searched out a lot of this.
mm,
Um, I really got into improvisation when I was 16 or so, and I'm doing it with these musicians. There wasn't so much the famous Black Artist Group guys, but a lot with this sax player named Jim Marshall, who's on these records of the Human Arts Ensemble, and a lot with Bobo Shaw.
mhm,
And I played with poet Ajule Rutland. I played with dancers. The whole thing was just to start improvising. A great poet named Michael Castro. And then when I get to New England Conservatory, look who my teachers are.
yeah,
Gunther. Gunther didn't care
that's what we
about
said. Yeah,
degrees. In fact, most of them never went to college, geniuses as they were. So we're playing, and that's what Gunther wanted. You're not just studying with George Russell and Jackie Byard, you're playing their music.
yeah,
And when you played their music, even as a kid, they didn't treat you like a student.
yeah,
They treated you like, hey, this is my music. Play it.
yeah,
So, and then this continued on into New York. And it was an exciting time because there was a lot of people trying to do new groups, new ensembles, new concepts.
yeah,
Um, I mean, in hindsight, look, I got to play a little bit with Jack DeJohnette's small group. I did do small groups, but I realize, um, and that whether it just wasn't my strength, and I don't think I was the greatest soloist of the time. I wasn't necessarily seen as a virtuoso soloist in the way some people look in small groups, but I surely was seen as someone who really understood how to interpret and how to be part of collective improvisation.
yeah, yeah,
And that's defined a lot of my own groups as well.
Yeah.
And so that's always been sort of my focus. And it's been I hope it isn't over. But looking back, there was just a lot of activity and there was a lot more things to do. So I do feel that has, in many ways, defined my life. Is entering into these musical worlds of other people. And then as a leader, I really think about it. There's some, I don't know where I saw the quote, it might even be some with Miles, that like, being a good leader is not making yourself sound good. It's making everybody else sound good.
Yeah.
Or if you make a situation where they do shine to the best that you can, it's going to be an exciting group.
Yeah.
Well, I think Miles is a good example.
Example for that. Yeah.
You know, he tended to at least till the later years.
Yeah.
In the famous, there was a certain synergy that he looked for, and by all indications, they did very little rehearsing. I was on a short panel up in Massachusetts with Danilo Perez. He's a lovely man and very funny, and he told us about his first day playing with Wayne Shorter. I mean, they've had that amazing group with Patitucci and Brian Blake. And he says, so he gets to the first gig, and there's no rehearsal, and he figures they're gonna run. This is Wayne Shorter's music, right? It's the greatest music ever written. And Wayne hands him a whole bunch of lead sheets of his music, and they're just sitting there talking. They're talking, and finally Danilo says, "Wayne, aren't we gonna go at least and rehearse or practice some of these?" rehearse some of this music? And Wayne looks at him and goes, "Why would you want to do that? How can you rehearse the future?"
Wow. Man.
And Danilo went on stage, and the group went on for 10 more years, and obviously Wayne had made the right phone call.
Yeah.
And it's a funny story, but it's also, hey kids, that's the level. Should you find yourself there, that's the level you're going to have to be.
Yeah.
And but it's sort of sweet. Now, I know I talk a lot. Of course, Danilo was a highly skilled, ready for that. And Wayne wasn't looking for him to play blinding 30-second note passages. But it's like, no, I'm not going to. These are things that we're going to make breathe, right? And it's a process.
Yeah.
And, I often use this quote of Lester Bowie, who was great for his quotes. And I met Lester when I was very young and heard him hold court. I met him when I was in St. Louis, and he liked to, but I remember him once saying, I know I put this in print a lot, so excuse me, people. I don't mean to be repetitive. You're like, oh God, this Marty Ehrlich guy, it's the same story. But it's a cool thing, because he said, with the Art Ensemble Chicago, we had some bad nights, but we had to have bad nights to have really great nights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know what he means, because they were willing to take things to a certain edge, and maybe one night it didn't all come together.
The pushing didn't go,
But on another night, it was transcendent.
Yeah.
Now that's different than music as a commercial thing. You can't do that with at Las Vegas.
Sure.
Singers don't do that. They were someone who does is Bob Dylan, who suddenly changes things now and again. But in general, his point was, we're willing to let whatever this thing called jazz, great black music, creative music, the new thing, whatever, we're willing to let it be a dynamic. And I think, at least in live music, I think the audiences, often the night he thought didn't quite work, that audience might have said, wow.
It was still good. Yeah, exactly.
Because they got some of the drama and the process.
Yeah. True.
At the same time, it's a life. Well, thank you, Samo.
Thank you so much, Marty.
For Slovenia soon. Hope we can all travel soon.
hope to see you on the road, and drop me a line if you come.
Music.
Yeah, to Austria or Slovenia or wherever you're near. Let me know. Let's meet for a beer or whatever, or I'll talk or to a gig, and would love to see you guys. So.
And you got
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.